and I was assigned to protect the alien, but our bond became far more intense. The assignment beneath twin moons. The twin moons of Vextara cast elongated shadows across the landing platform as Marcus Flynn checked his equipment for the third time. 15 years of security work had taught him that preparation prevented casualties, and this assignment felt different from the moment the briefing ended. Protect one Kashari envoy across 400 kilometers of contested territory where militant factions on both sides wanted the peace talks to fail spectacularly. The transport ship descended with a whisper of displaced air, its hull still glowing from atmospheric entry. Marcus straightened his jacket, fingers brushing the pulse weapon at his hip, more from habit than necessity. The cargo ramp descended with hydraulic precision, and then she appeared. Thyra Van Asher moved with a fluid grace that made human motion seem clumsy by comparison. Her features held an otherworldly elegance, with skin that seemed to catch and hold the moonlight. But what arrested Marcus completely were the luminescent patterns tracing across her exposed forearms and collarbone, swirling designs that shifted through subtle shades of amber and deep blue. He'd seen Kashari before, but never this close, never with such immediate and visceral impact. Security Specialist Flynn, her voice carried melodic undertones that seemed to resonate in his chest. Marcus is fine. He extended his hand, unsure if the gesture translated across their species. Welcome to Vextara, Envoy Van Asher. Thyra. She accepted his hand, her touch cool and electric. The patterns on her skin flickered briefly to pale green before settling back to amber. I appreciate the formality, but given we'll be traveling together for several days, perhaps we can dispense with titles. Her directness surprised him. Most diplomatic types he'd escorted preferred maintaining rigid protocols. Fair enough. Our transport leaves in 20 minutes. We'll be traveling light and fast, the northern route through the canyon systems. It's longer, but keeps us away from the main settlements where your presence might attract unwanted attention. Thyra's markings shifted slightly darker. You mean where those who oppose peace might attempt to eliminate me? I mean, I'll make sure that doesn't happen. Marcus gestured toward the waiting rover, a reinforced model designed for rough terrain. I've mapped 17 potential ambush points along our route and identified secure shelter locations. We move during optimal visibility hours and go dark at night. Boring, careful, and alive. That's how I run operations. Something flickered in Thyra's expression that might have been amusement. You have a reputation for never losing a client. That's why my people requested you specifically. Then they chose well. Marcus picked up her single travel case, noting its surprisingly light weight. Everything you need for the journey? I travel simply. Thyra followed him to the rover, her movements deliberate and measured. The documents I carry are secured digitally and biometrically. The physical versions remain in the diplomatic vessel as decoys. Smart, thought. Good operational security. You've done this before. 3 times across contested zones on different worlds. Thyra settled into the passenger seat, her markings briefly flaring brighter as the rover's systems activated around them. Though I confess, this particular mission feels different. The weight of potential peace feels like every kilometer feels significant. Marcus guided the rover away from the platform, the settlement's scattered lights falling away behind them as they headed into the vast darkness of the desert. The twin moons provided enough illumination to navigate by, casting the landscape in shades of silver and deep purple. You'll get used to the silence, Marcus said after several minutes of quiet. The desert at night is about as peaceful as it gets on Vextara. I find it beautiful. Thyra gazed out at the endless expanse of sand and stone. My homeworld has 3 moons, but they're smaller, distant. These feel close enough to touch. Marcus glanced sideways, catching how the moonlight played across her features, how her luminescent markings seemed to pulse in time with some internal rhythm. Professional distance, he reminded himself. She was a client, nothing more. But something in the way she looked at the moons with such open wonder, despite the danger surrounding them, made that reminder feel inadequate.
"We'll make camp in about 4 hours," he said, focusing on the terrain ahead. "There's a canyon shelter I've used before. Natural cover, defensible position, water source nearby." Thyra nodded, then surprised me by asking, "Have you always done this work? Protection details in dangerous places?" "Since I left military service, seemed like a natural transition. Same skills, different application." Marcus navigated around a boulder field, the rover's suspension adjusting automatically. "What about you? Always been a diplomatic courier?" "I studied interspecies communication and conflict resolution. When my government needed someone willing to carry sensitive materials through contested zones, I volunteered. My family thought I was reckless. Perhaps they were right." Courage and recklessness look similar from certain angles. The difference is usually just better planning. Thyra's cute laugh surprised me, warm and genuine. "I suspect we'll get along well, Marcus Flynn." The kilometers passed in companionable silence, broken by occasional observations about the terrain. Marcus found himself hyper-aware of her presence beside him, the subtle scent of something floral and unfamiliar, the way her markings provided a soft ambient glow in the rover's cabin. "Professional distance," he repeated internally, though the mantra was already wearing thin.
When the sands turned crimson, the ambush came at dawn, precisely when Marcus had marked it as most likely on his tactical maps. The canyon walls narrowed into a choke point, and the first energy blast scorched the sand 3 meters ahead of the rover, sending up a plume of superheated glass particles. "Hold on." Marcus wrenched the controls hard right, the rover's reinforced frame scraping against stone as he pushed into a defensive position behind a rock formation. 2 more blasts followed, closer this time. Through the dust, he counted at least 5 attackers positioned on the canyon rim. Professional setup, coordinated timing. Thyra's markings had gone completely dark, a survival instinct Marcus hadn't anticipated. "Militants?" Her voice remained steady, despite the situation. "Or mercenaries hired to look like militants. Either way, they're between us and the planned route." Marcus activated the rover's defensive shields, knowing they'd drain the power reserves within minutes. He pulled his pulse rifle from its mount, checking the charge. "The canyon splits about 200 meters ahead. If we can reach it on foot, there's a cave system I scouted last year. They won't follow us into unstable tunnels." Another blast hit their position, and the rover's alarm systems screamed warnings about shield integrity. Thyra grabbed her travel case without hesitation. "Then we go now, before they adjust their aim." Marcus appreciated that she didn't panic, didn't ask foolish questions about their chances. "Stay close, move fast, and if I say drop, you drop. Understand?" "Perfectly." Her markings flickered briefly amber, and Marcus realized it might be determination or trust. Maybe both. He triggered the rover's emergency countermeasures, flash charges that would buy them 30 seconds of cover. "Now." They burst from the rover's far side, Marcus leading, with Thyra close behind. The desert sand made running treacherous, each step sinking and sliding. Energy blasts tracked their movement, superheating the air around them. Marcus returned fire without breaking stride, forcing the attackers to take cover rather than aim carefully. 20 meters. 50 meters. The canyon split appeared ahead like salvation. Marcus felt rather than saw Thyra stumble, heard her sharp intake of breath. Without thinking, he grabbed her hand and pulled her forward. Her cool touch against his palm sent a jolt through him even in the midst of danger. They tumbled into the narrow canyon split as another blast carved a molten trench where they'd been standing seconds before. The passage was barely wide enough for them sideways, but it twisted deeper into the rock, away from the firing lines. "Keep moving," Marcus urged, still gripping her hand. The luminescent patterns on Thyra's skin had begun to glow faintly again, providing just enough light to navigate by. They squeezed through increasingly tight spaces, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them but growing more distant. The cave entrance appeared suddenly, a darker shadow in the canyon wall that Marcus recognized from his previous survey. He pulled Thyra inside, and they pressed deeper into the limestone chambers until the outside world became a distant memory of light and sound. Finally, in a chamber large enough to stand upright, Marcus released her hand and activated a portable light source. The sudden illumination revealed a space worn smooth by ancient water flow, with mineral deposits creating strange formations along the walls. "Are you hurt?" Marcus asked, giving Thyra a quick assessment. Her clothing was torn at the shoulder, revealing more of those mesmerizing luminescent patterns, but he saw no blood. "Bruised but functional." Thyra set down her travel case carefully. "You?" "Same." Marcus moved to the chamber entrance, listening for sounds of pursuit. "Nothing yet." "They won't follow us in here immediately. These caves are partially collapsed in places, and most locals know the tunnels are unstable. We should be safe for a few hours at least." Thyra sank down against the smooth stone wall, her markings pulsing with what I was beginning to recognize as relief. That was closer than I would have preferred. "Welcome to Vextara." Marcus joined her, maintaining a professional distance of about a meter as he pulled out his navigation pad. "The good news is, this cave system connects to another canyon about 3 kilometers north. We can emerge well away from where they're watching and continue on a different route." "And the bad news?" "And it'll take us through some tight passages, and we'll be navigating underground for most of a day." Marcus studied the geological scans on his pad. "Also, I'm going to need to contact my backup coordinator, which means a brief transmission that might be detected." Thyra's markings shifted to a thoughtful violet. Risks upon risks. Yet here we are, still breathing. Something in her tone made Marcus look up from his pad. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read, her features softened by the glow of her own bioluminescence and his portable light source. "You grabbed my hand back there," she said, quietly. "In the middle of the firefight." Marcus felt heat rise in his face. "Technical decision. Faster to pull you along than call out directions." "Of course," but the way her markings brightened slightly to a warmer shade suggested she didn't entirely believe him. Or perhaps didn't want to. The silence stretched between them, no longer quite as comfortable as it had been in the rover. Marcus found himself acutely aware of how small the chamber was, how the danger they'd just survived seemed to have stripped away some invisible barrier that had existed since they met. "I should make that transmission," he said, breaking the moment. "Check if our backup route is clear." Thyra nodded, but as Marcus turned away, she spoke again. "Marcus, thank you for getting us out of there. For—" She paused, and when he looked back, her markings had shifted to soft amber again. "For not hesitating." "It's my job," he answered automatically, then softened. "But you're welcome." He moved to the chamber entrance to boost his signal, but her quiet thank you followed him, settling somewhere deep in his chest, where professional distance couldn't quite reach it.
Beneath the constellation of wanderers, the underground journey took longer than Marcus had calculated. Twice they encountered collapsed passages that forced backtracking through narrow squeezes where they had to remove their packs and push them ahead. Thyra never complained, even when her luminescent markings scraped against rough stone, leaving faint trails of light that faded slowly. They emerged from the caves near sunset on the second day, both exhausted and covered in limestone dust. The new canyon they'd reached was wider, with actual vegetation clinging to stone, hardy desert plants that meant water nearby. "We'll camp here tonight," Marcus decided, scanning the area for threats. The canyon walls provided natural cover, and a small spring fed a shallow pool surrounded by red rocks. "Get some rest while I set up the perimeter sensors." Thyra moved immediately to the water, kneeling beside it with visible relief. Marcus tried not to watch as she cupped water in her hands, droplets catching the fading sunlight as they ran down her forearms, making her markings shimmer. He forced his attention to the security equipment, placing motion sensors at strategic points around their campsite. By the time he finished, Thyra had cleaned herself up and was unpacking rations from her case. The twin moons were rising, painting the canyon in silver and shadow. Marcus built a small thermal fire, contained flames that produced minimal smoke, and they settled on opposite sides of it. "How much longer to the diplomatic station?" Thyra asked, accepting the ration pack he offered. "If we maintain good pace and avoid more ambushes, 2 more days, maybe 3.
Marcus activated his navigation pad, showing her their updated route. "We'll skirt the southern settlements here, then cut through the mineral flats. It's exposed, but we can cover ground quickly." Thyra studied the map, her face illuminated by both the screen's glow and her own soft luminescence. "You know this terrain remarkably well for someone not native to Vextara. Spent 3 years here on various contracts. The desert gets under your skin after a while." Marcus accepted his own ration pack, though he wasn't particularly hungry. "What about you? You said you've done this work 3 times before. Where else?" "The ice colonies of Marith, the jungle territories on Tandros Prime, and the floating cities above Koresh." Thyra's markings flickered through several colors as she spoke, perhaps triggered by memory. Each one had its own dangers. On Tandros, the predators were worse than the militants. On Koresh, it was the weather systems that nearly killed me. "But you kept volunteering." Marcus found himself genuinely curious. "Why risk it repeatedly?" Thyra was quiet for a long moment, staring into the thermal flames. When she finally spoke, her voice carried unexpected vulnerability. "Because I believe peace is worth personal risk. Because someone has to be willing to carry the message between people who have forgotten how to talk to each other." Her markings deepened to indigo. "And perhaps because I've never quite fit into the quieter life my people expected for me." I understood that sentiment more than I wanted to admit. The quiet life has its appeal, though. No one shooting at you, no sleeping in caves, regular meals. But no purpose? Thyra looked up, meeting his eyes across the fire. No feeling that what you do matters beyond your own survival. Don't you feel that? Isn't that why you keep taking these assignments instead of accepting some comfortable corporate security position on a peaceful world? The question struck closer than Marcus expected. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just good at this and haven't figured out what else to do with myself. I don't believe that. Thyra's markings brightened to amber, warm and certain. You could have left me to the attackers, found a way to claim I was lost in the ambush. Instead, you grabbed my hand and ran into danger with me. That's not someone just doing a job. Marcus felt the weight of her gaze, the firelight catching in her eyes in a way that made his chest tighten. I don't abandon people under my protection. That's just basic professionalism. Is professionalism that makes you check on me every few hours? That made you give me the warmer blanket last night in the caves without thinking I'd notice? Thyra's voice was gentle, not accusatory. Marcus, I'm not human, but I can still recognize when someone cares beyond duty. The desert wind picked up, carrying the scent of night-blooming flowers from somewhere in the canyon. Marcus should have deflected, should have reinforced those professional boundaries. Instead, he found himself saying, "You're easy to care about." The admission hung between them like something physical. Thyra's markings flared brilliant gold for just a moment, before she seemed to consciously dim them back to amber. She stood, moving around the fire with deliberate steps, until she was sitting beside him, rather than across from him. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the space. Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. She settled close enough that he could feel the subtle coolness of her presence, could see the intricate details of the luminescent patterns that traced along her collarbone and disappeared beneath her clothing. "On my world," Thyra said softly, "these markings, they respond to emotion. We can control them somewhat, but strong feelings make them difficult to hide." She extended her arm between us, where the patterns swirled in complex spirals. "Right now, they're showing that I feel safe with you, content, and—" She paused, and the patterns shifted subtly warmer, drawn to you in ways I didn't expect. Marcus's pulse quickened. "Thyra, we should probably maintain professional distance," she finished, turning to face him fully. "Yes, that would be wise, practical. But when has anything about this journey been practical? I've been terrified since this mission began, terrified of failing,
of dying in some canyon like the one we barely escaped. But with you, I feel something else. Something I haven't felt in years. What's that? Marcus asked, his voice rough. Hope. Connection. The possibility that even in the middle of chaos, something beautiful might exist. Her markings pulsed gently, hypnotic in their rhythm. Tell me I'm alone in feeling this, and I'll move back to the other side of the fire. Tell me this is only duty for you, and I'll never mention it again. Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, and couldn't find the words to push her away. Didn't want to. You're not alone in feeling it. Thyra's breath caught, her markings blazing bright before settling into the warmest amber he'd seen yet. Slowly, giving him every chance to pull away, she closed the distance between their hands until her fingers touched his. The contact sent electricity through him, her cool skin against his warmth, creating a sensation he'd never experienced. Her fingers curled tentatively around his, and Marcus found himself turning his hand to properly hold hers, their palms pressing together. This complicates things, he said, but made no move to let go. Everything was already complicated. Thyra leaned slightly closer, her shoulder nearly touching his. At least this complication feels good. They sat like that as the moons climbed higher, hands intertwined, watching the stars emerge in the vast desert sky. Thyra pointed out constellations from her homeworld, patterns Marcus couldn't see but enjoyed hearing about. He told her about the constellation of Wanderers, visible only from Vextara, 7 stars that supposedly guided lost travelers home. Do you believe that? Thyra asked, that the stars guide us? I believe we find our way somehow, even when it feels impossible. Marcus squeezed her hand gently, and sometimes the path takes us places we never expected. Thyra rested her head against his shoulder, a gesture of trust that made Marcus's heart race. Her markings dimmed to a soft, peaceful glow. I'm glad my path led you to you. Marcus wanted to say something equally profound, but settled for lifting their joined hands and pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. Thyra's markings flared bright for just a moment, and he felt her smile against his shoulder. They should have been planning their next move, reviewing security protocols, resting for the journey ahead. Instead, they sat beneath the constellation of Wanderers, holding each other in the desert night, and let themselves feel something beyond duty and danger. For a few stolen hours, they weren't envoy and guardian. They were simply 2 souls finding unexpected comfort in each other's presence. When exhaustion finally claimed them, they settled into their sleeping arrangements, still side by side, hands finding each other in the darkness. Marcus fell asleep to the gentle pulse of Thyra's luminescence, feeling more at peace than he had in years.
The storm that bound us. The sandstorm hit without warning on their 3rd day of travel. One moment, they were crossing the mineral flats under clear skies. The next, the horizon turned brown and the wind began screaming across the desert with enough force to tear equipment from their hands. "Emergency shelter," Marcus shouted over the howl, already pulling Thyra toward a rocky outcropping he'd spotted minutes before. Sand blasted against them like 1,000 tiny knives, reducing visibility to nearly zero. They stumbled into a shallow cave, barely more than a depression in the rock face, but it cut the wind enough to breathe. Marcus triggered his emergency beacon, knowing they'd have to wait out the storm before continuing. Through the cave entrance, the world had become a wall of churning sand and dust. "How long do these typically last?" Thyra asked. Her markings dimmed almost completely in what Marcus now recognized as stress response. "Anywhere from hours to days." He pulled out a thermal sheet, the only real shelter equipment they had. "We'll need to share body heat. The temperature's already dropping, and it'll get worse once the sun's completely blocked." Thyra nodded without hesitation, moving closer as Marcus wrapped the thermal sheet around both of them. The space was tight, forcing them into intimate proximity, their bodies pressed together for warmth. Outside, the storm raged louder, and the temperature continued its precipitous fall. "I can't stop shaking," Thyra admitted after several minutes, her whole body trembling against his. Marcus wrapped her arms around him more securely, pulling her fully against his chest. "It's the cold. Your body temperature runs cooler than humans normally. You're probably feeling this worse than I am." Thyra burrowed closer, her face pressing into the curve of his neck. Her markings had gone almost completely dark, just the faintest blue glow remaining. "I'm sorry. I know this is—" "Don't apologize." Marcus adjusted the thermal sheet, trying to trap more heat. "Just focus on staying warm." But as minutes turned into hours and the storm showed no signs of abating, the cold became more aggressive. Thyra's trembling worsened, despite their shared warmth. Marcus made a decision, pulling her into his lap so he could wrap himself around her more completely, his body heat surrounding her. "Better?" he asked, his lips close to her ear. Thyra nodded against his chest, her arms wrapping around his torso beneath the thermal sheet. "Much better. Thank you." The intimacy of their position wasn't lost on Marcus. Every breath pressed them closer together. He could feel the rhythm of her heartbeat, surprisingly fast, could smell that subtle floral scent that he'd noticed since they first met. Thyra's face remained buried against his neck, her breath warm against his skin. "Marcus," she whispered after a long silence, "I need to tell you something. Before we reach the diplomatic station, before this mission ends and we return to our separate lives." "You don't have to." "I do." Thyra pulled back just enough to look at him, her markings brightening slightly to soft violet. In the dim light of the cave, her features were ethereal, vulnerable. "These past days with you have been the most terrifying and the most alive I've ever felt. And it's not just the danger or the adrenaline. It's you. The way you make me feel safe and brave simultaneously. The way you look at me like I'm more than just a diplomatic courier or an alien species." He cupped her face gently, his thumb tracing along her cheekbone, careful of the luminescent patterns there. "You are more. So much more." "Then why are we pretending this is temporary?" Thyra's hand came up to cover his, holding it against her face. "Why are we acting like when this mission ends, whatever this is between us has to end too?" "Because I don't know how it could work." Marcus's voice was raw with honesty. "You have a life on your homeworld, responsibilities. I'm a drifter who takes dangerous contracts on frontier planets. What kind of future?" Thyra kissed him, cutting off his protests. It was tentative at first, a question rather than a statement. Her lips were cool and soft, tasting faintly of the desert minerals. Marcus froze for a heartbeat, then responded, his hand sliding into her hair as he deepened the kiss. Thyra's markings blazed brilliant gold, bright enough that even with his eyes closed, Marcus could see the light. She shifted in his lap, turning fully toward him, and her hands framing his face as the kiss intensified. All the tension and attraction they'd been containing for days poured into that contact, hungry and desperate and real. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Thyra's entire body was illuminated, patterns he'd never seen before revealing themselves along her arms, her shoulders, her throat. These markings only appear like this during moments of intense emotion, joy, passion. She trailed off, her eyes dark and wanting. "Marcus, if we do this," Marcus started, trying to maintain some shred of rationality. "I know the complications. I know all the logical reasons to stop." Thyra's fingers traced along his jaw, his neck. "But right now, trapped in this cave with a storm raging outside and only you for warmth, I don't want logic. I want to feel alive. I want you." Marcus groaned, capturing her mouth again in a kiss that held nothing back. His hands roamed her back, feeling the subtle ridges of more luminescent patterns beneath her clothing. Thyra responded with equal fervor, her touch exploring him with wonder and desire. They moved together with increasing urgency, the thermal sheet falling away as their sheared heat became more than sufficient. Thyra's markings provided the only light, turning the small cave into something magical and otherworldly. Every touch revealed new patterns on her skin, glowing trails that marked where his hands traveled. "You're so beautiful," Marcus breathed against her throat, feeling her pulse race. Dawn of new horizons. The storm had passed by dawn. leaving the desert transformed into sculpted dunes and glittering mineral deposits. Marcus woke first, Thyra still nestled against him in the shelter of the cave, her markings dim and peaceful in sleep. The thermal sheet was tangled around them, and the morning light painted everything in shades of rose and gold. He traced a finger gently along her shoulder, following one of the luminescent patterns that had revealed itself during the night. Thyra stirred, her markings brightening gradually as consciousness returned. When she opened her eyes and found him watching her, a slow smile curved her lips. "Good morning," she murmured, her voice still rough with sleep. "Good morning." Marcus brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Storm's cleared. We should be able to reach the diplomatic station by tonight if we move quickly." Thyra's smile faltered slightly. "Back to reality, then." "Thyra," Marcus began, but she pressed a finger to his lips. "Don't. Not yet. Let me have a few more moments before we have to figure out what comes next." She curled closer, and Marcus wrapped his arms around her, holding her against his chest as the sun continued its rise beyond the cave entrance. They stayed like that for several minutes, neither wanting to break the spell of intimacy they'd created. Finally, practical necessity forced them to move. They gathered their scattered equipment, checked the navigation systems, and prepared for the final leg of their journey. The terrain was easier after the storm, the sand packed firm and the air crystalline clear. They made excellent time across the flats, passing through areas where the mineral deposits caught the sunlight and threw rainbow reflections across the landscape. Thyra walked close beside Marcus, their hands brushing frequently, neither willing to completely abandon the connection they'd forged. As the diplomatic station came into view on the horizon, a cluster of buildings surrounded by security barriers, the reality of their situation settled over them like a weight. Thyra would deliver her documents, the peace accords would be processed, and she would return to her homeworld. Marcus would collect his payment and move on to his next contract. That was how these things worked. Except neither of them wanted it to work that way. "We need to talk about this," Marcus said, as they approached the final checkpoint, still several kilometers from the station. "About what happens after you complete your mission." Thyra stopped walking, turning to face him fully. Her markings shifted through several colors before settling on that deep violet he'd learned meant vulnerability. "I don't want to return to my old life, not without you in it somehow. I don't want to go back to drifting from contract to contract, always alone." Marcus took her hands in his. "But I don't know how to make this work. Your people, my work, the distance between worlds." "Then we figure it out together." Thyra squeezed his hands. "My diplomatic work doesn't have to be based on my homeworld. There are permanent liaison positions on frontier stations, places where someone with my experience would be valuable. And you could work security for diplomatic missions specifically. We've proven we work well together." Marcus felt hope kindle in his chest. "You'd be willing to stay in frontier space? Give up the stability of home?" "Home is wherever I feel I belong. And these past days with you, I've felt more at home than I have in years." Thyra's markings brightened to warm amber. "Unless you don't want..." Marcus kissed her, pulling her close in the middle of the desert, with the diplomatic station visible in the distance. When they parted, both were smiling. "We'll make it work," he promised. Somehow, they completed the final approach to the station hand in hand. The security personnel who met them looked somewhat surprised by their closeness, but said nothing as they were escorted through the checkpoints. Thyra was taken immediately to the diplomatic offices to deliver her documents and provide her report.
Marcus waited in the security liaison quarters, pacing restlessly. The mission was complete. Thyra was safe. The documents delivered. By all professional standards, it had been a perfect success. But the thought of her leaving, of returning to separate lives, made his chest ache in ways no injury ever had. It was nearly evening when Thyra finally found him, her face alight with excitement. Her markings were blazing gold, bright enough to draw stares from passing personnel. She said breathlessly, "The peace accords were accepted. Both sides have agreed to begin formal negotiations. Marcus, it worked. What we delivered actually worked." Marcus pulled her into his arms, lifting her off his feet in his relief and joy. "You did it! I knew you would." When he set her down, Thyra kept her arms around his neck. "We did it. And there's more. The Diplomatic Council wants to expand the liaison program. They're offering me a permanent position coordinating courier missions across this sector. And they specifically requested that security protocols include dedicated protection specialists for high-value transports." Marcus's heart leapt. "Meaning?" "Meaning, if you're interested, we could work together, officially, as a team." Thyra's smile was radiant. They were impressed by our success rate and survival skills. Apparently, word of our escape from the ambush and the storm has already spread. We're being held up as an example of effective cross-species cooperation. "If they only knew the whole story," Marcus said with a laugh. "Oh, I think they suspect." Thyra pulled him closer, her markings pulsing with happiness. The senior diplomat made a pointed comment about personal connections fostering diplomatic success. "I may have been somewhat obvious about not wanting to leave you behind." Marcus cupped her face, his thumbs tracing her luminescent patterns. "So we're really doing this? Building a life together despite all the complications?" "Every worthwhile thing involves complications." Thyra's voice was soft but certain. "And you, Marcus Fling, are very worthwhile." They sealed the decision with a kiss, neither caring that they were standing in the middle of a busy diplomatic station, that people were watching with varying degrees of curiosity and approval. When they finally broke apart, Thyra's markings were so bright that they cast dancing lights across the walls. "I love how you glow when you're happy," Marcus murmured against her forehead. "Then I expect to be quite luminescent for the foreseeable future," Thyra laughed, the sound pure and joyful. "Shall we go file our joint application for the liaison program?" "Together," Marcus agreed, taking her hand. They walked through the stations side by side, already making plans for their next mission, their next adventure. The path ahead would have its challenges. Cultural differences to navigate, bureaucratic hurdles to clear, the inevitable dangers of frontier work. But they would face it all together. As the twin moons rose over Vextara once more, Marcus and Thyra stood on the station's observation deck, wrapped in each other's arms. The desert stretched endlessly below them, the same landscape where they'd fought for survival and found something far more precious than either had expected. "No regrets?" Marcus asked softly. Thyra's markings blazed brilliant gold as she looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "Not a single one. You?" "Only that I didn't kiss you sooner," Marcus smiled, then grew more serious. "Thyra, what we have, it's more than I ever thought possible. You're more than I ever thought possible. We're more than either of us thought possible," Thyra corrected, her hand finding his over her heart. "Together, we're something entirely new, human and Kishari, guardian and diplomat, two souls who found each other across impossible odds." "Sounds like the beginning of a story," Marcus observed. "No." Thyra turned in his arms, pulling him down for another kiss, slow and deep and full of promise. When she pulled back, her smile was luminous. It sounds like the beginning of forever. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and constant, bearing witness to a bond that transcended species and circumstance. In the desert where they'd fought and survived and fallen in love, Marcus and Thyra had discovered something the peace accords could never fully capture. That connection and trust and passion could bridge any divide, could turn duty into devotion, could transform a simple protection assignment into the foundation of a shared future. Their journey together was just beginning, but as they stood beneath the constellation of wanderers, neither had any doubt they'd found their way home.